Hello everyone, I am Chris May Q. Rios. Along with me is my partner Casilac, assigned in Chapter 9, which is the intelligence and its measurement. In this chapter, we look at the varied ways intelligence has been defined and we survey various approaches to its measurement. Along the way, we will address some of the major issues surrounding how and why intelligence is measured. Before all of that, however, let's consider a question that logically precedes consideration of intelligence measurement issues. So what is intelligence? What comes to your mind when you hear or read the word intelligence?
So for the chapter 9, this is all the subtopics of the intelligence and its measurements. So we will talk about the what is intelligence, the perspectives on intelligence, measuring intelligence, which are the some tasks used to measure intelligence, some tests used to measure intelligence, and also the issues in the assessment of intelligence, which are the culture and measured intelligence, the Flynn effect, the construct validity of tests and intelligence, a perspective.
So, intelligence, defined as a multifaceted capacity that manifests itself in different ways across the lifespan. In general, intelligence includes the abilities to acquire and apply knowledge, reason logically, plan effectively, infer perceptively, make sound judgments and solve problems, grasp and visualize concepts, pay attention, be intuitive, find the right words and thoughts with facility, cope with, adjust to, and make the most of new situations. So how intelligence is defined by the young children? Young children may define intelligence in terms that emphasize positive interpersonal skills such as acting nice or being helpful or polite. For older children, more emphasis in the definition will typically be placed on academic skills such as reading well. And for the psychologists, universal agreement such as to how intelligence should be defined has been a bit more elusive, while most may view it as an abstract construct. Some see it as having a more tangible existence at the level of the neuron.
So for the next slide is the professionals' views on intelligence. So Francis Galton, 1822 to 1911, Galton believed that the most intelligent persons were those equipped with the best sensory abilities. This position was intuitively appealing because, as Galton observed, the only information that reaches us concerning outward events appears to pass through the avenues of our senses. And the more perceptive the senses are of the difference, the larger is the field upon which our judgment and intelligence can act. So, following this logic, tests of visual acuity or hearing ability are, in a sense, or tests of intelligence. Galton attempted to measure this sort of intelligence in many of the sensorimotor and other perception-related tests he devised. So for Alfred Binet views on intelligence, I will just explain this one in the next slides. So mo adto ta kay David Wechsler. So David Wechsler, 1896 to 1981. In Wechsler's definition of intelligence, there is an explicit reference to an aggregate or global capacity. Intelligence operationally defined as the aggregate or global capacity of the individual to act purposefully, to think rationally, and to deal effectively with his environment. It is aggregate or global because um, it is composed of elements or abilities which, though not entirely independent, are qualitatively different. Of these abilities, we ultimately the intelligence. But intelligence is not identical with the mere sum of these abilities. However, inclusive, the only way we can evaluate it quantitatively is by the measurement of the various aspects of this ability. Elsewhere, Wechsler added that there are non-intellective factors that must be taken into account when assessing intelligence. Included among those factors are the capabilities, more of the nature of cognitive, affective, or personality traits. Include such traits are drive, persistence, and goal awareness, as well as an individual's potential to perceive and respond to social, moral, and aesthetic values. Ultimately, Wechsler was of the opinion that the best way to measure this global ability was by measuring aspects of several qualitatively differentiable abilities. Wechsler in 1974 wrote of two such differentiable abilities which he conceived as being primarily verbal or performance based on nature. So today, the conceptualization of intelligence in terms of these factors are a verbal factor and a performance factor, and is largely a matter of historical interest. So next is Jean Piaget views on intelligence. So in 1896 to 1980, Piaget views intelligence as a conceived of kind of evolving biological adaptation to the outside world. As cognitive skills are gained, adaptation at a symbolic level increases, and mental trial and error replaces physical trial and error. Yet, according to Piaget, the process of cognitive development occurs neither solely through maturation nor solely through learning. He believed that as a consequence of interaction with the environment, psychological structures become reorganized. Piaget described four stages of cognitive development through which he theorized all of us pass during our lifetimes. Although individuals can move through these stages at different rates and ages, he believed that their order was unchangeable. Piaget viewed the unfolding of these stages of cognitive development as the result of the interaction of biological factors and learning. Interested readers will find more about Piaget's theory of cognitive development.
So, history of intelligence and intelligence testing. So, Francis Galton is one of the first to study intelligence. He believed that psychophysical abilities were the basis of intelligence that could be understood through scientific investigation. So, gina-define ni Francis Galton ang intelligence as our best equipped sensory abilities. Galton observed that the only information that reaches us concerning outward events appears to pass through the avenues of our senses. And the more perceptive the senses are of difference, the larger is the field upon which our judgment and intelligence can act. So Galton attempted to measure this sort of intelligence in many of the sensory motor and other perception-related tests he devised. Among his many other accomplishments, Sir Francis Galton is remembered as the first person to publish on the heritability of intelligence, thus anticipating later nature-nurture debates. James Mackin Cattell. Cattell coined the term mental test and would then apply these tests to a larger number of individuals. The test finally rendered irrelevant with the development of Alfred Binet's intelligence measurements. So Galton's efforts were followed up by in the United States by the psychologist James Mackin Cattell. However, after a series of studies, his student Clark Wessler demonstrated that there was no statistical relation between scores on Cattell's test and academic performance. The tests were finally rendered irrelevant with the development of Alfred Binet's intelligence measurements. Binet was appointed by the French Minister of Public Instruction to a commission concerned with the problem of retardation among public school children in pairs. The work of Binet and Simon was quickly picked up by Louis Madison Thurman, a psychologist at Stanford University. This version became the Stanford-Binet test. So in papers critical of Galton's approach to intellectual assessment, Binet and a colleague called for more complex measurements of intellectual ability. So disagree si Binet sa point ni Galton, which is, ang point ni Galton is, ang intelligence is a number of distinct processes or abilities that could be assessed only by separate tests. In contrast, Binet argued that when one solves a particular problem, the abilities used cannot be separated because they interact to produce the solution. For example, memory and concentration interact when a subject is asked to repeat digits is presented orally. When analyzing a test taker's response to such a task, it is difficult to determine the relative contribution of memory and concentration to the successful solution. This difficulty in determining the relative contribution of distinct abilities is the reason Binet called for more complex measurements of intelligence. Although Binet never explicitly defined intelligence, he discussed its components in terms of reasoning, judgment, memory, and abstraction. Perspectives of intelligence. Interactionism. Interactionism is the heredity and environment presumed to interact and influence the development of one's intelligence. A major thread running through the theories of Binet, Wechsler, and Piaget is a focus on interactionism. For example, Anne is C. Louis Leon Thurston. Thurston conceived of intelligence as composed of what he termed primary mental abilities, or the PMAs. Thurston developed and published the primary mental abilities test, which consisted of separate tests and designed to measure one PMA, which are the verbal meaning, perceptual speed, reasoning, number facility, rote memory, word fluency, and spatial relations. Although the test was not widely used, this early model of multiple abilities inspired other theories and test developers to explore various components of intelligence and ways to measure them. So, information processing theories. The information processing theory focuses on identifying specific mental processes that constitute intelligence. It is explain how our mind manages information. So in the information processing, research in memory is based on the assumption that information moves into sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory in an organized way. It is a cognitive theory that focuses on how information is encoded into our memory. If you still remember, guys, kinings the information processing theories, kay, it describes how our brains filter information from what we're paying attention to in the present moment to what gets stored in our short-term or working memory and ultimately into our long-term memory. First, we perceive something through our sensory memory, which is everything we can see, hear, feel, or taste in a given moment. While our short-term memory is what we use to remember things for the very short periods, like for example, a phone number. And the last is the long-term memory, or it is stored permanently in our brains. Like permanent na siya ma-stored through our brain ang mga information nga naa sa tuwa. So next slide. The factor analytic theories is the focus squarely on identifying the ability or groups of abilities deemed to constitute intelligence, while the factor analysis is a collection of observed set of underlying variables called factors that can explain the interrelationships among those variables. So factor analysis is a group of statistical techniques designed to determine the existence of underlying relationships between sets of variables, including test scores. In search of a definition of intelligence, theorists have used factor analysis to study correlations between tests measuring varied abilities presumed to reflect the underlying attribute of intelligence. Factor analysis is a type of statistical procedure that is conducted to identify clusters or groups of related items called the factors on a test. For example, when you take a multiple choice, like the introductory psychology test, the factor analysis there can be done to see what types of questions you did best on and worst on. Maybe they did best on factual types of questions, but really poorly on conceptual types of questions. Another example is the 4 different tests to measure people's English skills, grammar, speaking skills, and writing skills. If the correlation between these 4 tests were 0, then the factor analysis would suggest to us that we have measured 4 abilities, but for instance, the correlation between the English skills and grammar tests were quite high, and supposedly a high correlation between speaking skills and writing skills could be the factor analysis would suggest that we have measured two abilities instead of 4. The intelligence test was formulated on factor analysis under the assumption that all of these test scores and all of these values could be reduced down into one factor called the intelligence quotient or the IQ. Factor analytic theories of intelligence. As early as 1904, the British psychologist Charles Spearman pioneered new techniques to measure intercorrelations between tests. He found that measures of intelligence tended to correlate to various degrees with each other. Spearman formalized these observations into an influential theory of general intelligence that postulated the existence of a general intellectual ability factor, or denoted by an italic lowercase g, that is partially topped by all other mental abilities. Intelligence consists of G, or the general factor, or S as the specific factor or the special factor. Theorists have used factor analysis to study the correlation between tests measuring varied abilities presumed to reflect the underlying intelligence. Ginatest ni Spearman kung unsa jud ka-well mag-perform into various tasks relating to intelligence. Such tasks include distinguishing pitch, perceiving weight and colors, directions, and mathematics. Spearman used factor analysis to examine relationships between people, scores on different types of intelligence tests. When analyzing the data he collected, Spearman noted that those did well in one areas also scored higher in other areas. With this data, Spearman concluded that there must be one central that influences our cognitive abilities. As a result of this research, Spearman developed a two-factor theory of intelligence. He proposed that intellectual abilities were comprised of two factors. In the middle of overlapping circles, like here, kita man mo picture really ang apart. Overlapping circles would be the G here sa center ng part, which influences all the specific intelligence, while S, kini silang S mechanical, S verbal, S spatial, and the S numerical, kay ga-represent ni siya four circles. Many multiple factors of intelligence have been proposed. Some of these activities have explained the mental activities. So the multiple factor theory of intelligence. Louis Leon Thurston proposed theory in 1930s that intelligence is composed of several different factors. Thurston initially conceived of intelligence as being composed of 7 primary abilities. However, after designing tests to measure these abilities and noting a moderate correlation between the tests, Thurston became convinced that it was difficult, if not possible, to develop an intelligence test that did not top the G. So the 7 primary mental abilities in Thurston's model were verbal comprehension, word fluency, number facility, spatial visualization, associative memory, perceptual speed, and reasoning. Thurston believed that the average taken from the 7 types of mental abilities would equal a number of similar to Spearman's G factor. So another multiple factor models of intelligence theory is kay Howard Gardner nga theory. Well, most of us kay familiar naman kay Howard Gardner. So in order to capture the full range of abilities and talents that people possess, Gardner theorizes that people do not have just an intellectual capacity, but have many kinds of intelligence, including the musical, interpersonal, spatial, visual, and linguistic intelligence. So, dili na kayo ni siya i-explain kay familiar naman siya sa tuwatanan. So, another slide. Si Raymond Bernard Cattell, which is, yung theory is the fluid intelligence and the crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence involves being able to think and reason abstractly and solve problems. This ability is considered independent of learning, experience, and education. Crystallized intelligence is based upon facts and rooted in experiences. As we age and accumulate new knowledge and understanding, crystallized intelligence becomes stronger. In recent years, a theory of intelligence first proposed by Raymond B. Cattell and subsequently modified by Horn has received increasing attention from test developers as well as test users. Theory postulated the existence of two major types of cognitive abilities, which are the crystallized intelligence and the fluid intelligence. The abilities that make up crystallized intelligence symbolizes GC include acquired skills and knowledge that are dependent on exposure to a particular culture, as well as on formal and informal education, vocabulary, for one of the example, retrieval of information and application of general knowledge are conceived of as elements of crystallized intelligence. The abilities that make up with intelligence are symbolized as the GF are nonverbal, relatively culture-free, and independent of specific instruction, such as memory for digits. Through the years, Horn proposed the addition of several factors: visual processing, auditory processing, quantitative processing, speed processing, facility with reading and writing, short-term memory and long-term memory, and the retrieval. According to Horn, some of the abilities such as GVRD vulnerable abilities in that they declined with age and tend not to return to pre-injury levels following brain damage. Others of these abilities, such as the quantitative processing or maintained abilities, tend to not decline with age and may return to pre-injury levels following for the brain damage. For the last theories, which is John B. Carroll, proposed the three-stratum theory of cognitive development. Cognitive abilities, rather. The three-layer strata are defined as representing narrow, broad, and a general cognitive ability. Stratum 1, or the specific level, is the more specific factors under the stratum 2. Stratum 2, or the broad abilities, having 8 broad abilities, which are the fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence, general factor, general memory and learning, broad visual perception, broad auditory perception, broad retrieval ability, broad cognitive speediness, and processing speed. While in the stratum 3, or the general intelligence, or the G factor accounts for the correlations among the broad abilities at stratum 2. So, in geology, a stratum is a layer of rock information having the same composition throughout. Strata, or the plural of stratum, are representation of each of the strata in Carroll's theory. Desire for a comprehensive, agreed-upon conceptualization of human cognitive abilities has led some researchers to try to extract elements of existing models to create a new or more complete model using the factor analysis as well as other statistical tools. While the Cattell, Horn, and Carroll models are similar in several factors, designation of broad abilities or the second stratum level in Carroll's theory that subsume several narrow abilities. Another difference between the two models concerns whether or not abilities labeled as a quantitative knowledge and the reading writing ability should each be considered as a distinct broad ability as they are in the Cattell-Horn model. For Carroll, all of these abilities are the first stratum narrow abilities. Other differences between the two models include the notation, the specific definitions of abilities, and the grouping of narrow factors related to the memory.
Next is the measuring intelligence. The measurement of intelligence entails sampling an examinee's performance on different types of tests and tasks as a function of developmental level. At all developmental levels, the intellectual assessment process also provides a standardized situation from which the examinee's approach to the various tasks can be closely observed, therefore provides an opportunity for an assessment that in itself can have great utility in settings as diverse as schools, the military, and business organizations. Some tasks used to measure intelligence. So in infancy, the period from birth through 18 months, intellectual assessment consists primarily of measuring sensory motor development. This includes the measurement of nonverbal motor responses such as turning over, lifting the head, sitting up, moving object with the eyes, imitating gestures, and reaching for a group of objects. The examiner who attempts to assess the intellectual and related abilities of infants must be skillful in establishing and maintaining rapport with examinees who do not yet know the meaning of words like cooperation and patience. Typically, measures of infant intelligence rely to a great degree on information obtained from a structured interview with the examinee's parents, guardians, or other caretakers. For the school psychologists and others who have occasion to assess young children, enlisting the participation of parents or other caregivers can, practically speaking, be challenging in its own right. Just as the consulting psychologist profiled in these chapters meet in assessment of professional. So, in the focus in evaluation of the older child shifts to verbal and performance abilities. More specifically, the child may be called on to perform tasks designed to yield a measure of general fund of information, vocabulary, social judgment, language, reasoning, numerical concepts, auditory and visual memory, attention, concentration, and spatial visualization. The administration of many of the items may be preceded as prescribed by the test manual with teaching items designed to provide the examinee with practice in what is required by a particular test item. So, according to Wechsler no, in 1958, he proposed that adult intelligence skills should tap abilities such as retention of general information, quantitative reasoning, expressive language and memory, and social judgment. The types of tasks used to reach these measurement objectives on the Wechsler scale for adults are the same as many of the tasks used on the Wechsler scales for children, although the content of specific items may vary. Note that tests of intelligence are seldom administered to adults for purposes of educational placement. Rather, they may be given to obtain clinically relevant information or some measure of learning potential and skill acquisition. Data from the administration of an adult intelligence test may be used to evaluate the faculties of an impaired individual or one suspected of being senile, traumatized, or otherwise impaired for the purpose of judging that person's competency to make important decisions such as the regarding a will or contract or the other legal matter. Insurance companies rely on such data to make determinations regarding disability. Data from adult intelligence tests may also be used to help make decisions about vocational and career decisions and transitions.
So that would be all my part. Next for the presentation for the continuation of the report is Ms. Aliana Casilac's part. That's all, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for listening.